Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 259 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is the quality of the questions you ask. Our quote of the day comes to us from Tony Robbins. The quality of your life comes down to the quality of the questions you ask yourself on a daily basis. It is a complete honor to have Larry Hagner on our show today. I initially met him back in 2016 after reading one of his books. He shares his very personal no-quit story with us, and I can't thank him enough for both his vulnerability as well as his honesty. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Larry, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
It's an honor to be here, my friend. Good to see you.
I appreciate you too. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
I think we can do it. I'm pretty sure. I feel good about this.
That's the best way to answer. So, as you know, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire people to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story of your own or perhaps a really challenging time that tested you and you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, I've got a few. I have one, when I was 12, one that I was 30, and then one just in 2017. So maybe you take your pick on which age you want to hear, and maybe I'll start there.
All right. Well, first of all, I love the way you answered this because that's almost the exact same way everybody answers. They say, well, which one or which of the 12 do you want to hear? And I think that's the reason why we have this show. But I'm gonna say the most recent one, if you don't mind.
Sure. So that was in 2017. I kind of, this is a super authentic thing for me to share. I don't share it often. If I'm being totally real with you, I was like, I hope he doesn't pick the 2017 one, but you did. So now I'm committed, right? But yeah, so what happened to me in 2017? So, if you back up, what was going on in my life? So I'm wearing a t-shirt today. It says Seal Fit. I'm a big fan of Mark Devine. I always have been. He runs a couple different challenges, one being the Seal Fit 20X, Seal Fit, I believe it's a 24-hour challenge, and then there's the 50-hour Kokoro. And this is a crucible event. It's basically taking 12 to 50 hours of that Navy SEAL Hell Week and replicating it for civilians. And what I've heard from, I have a few friends of mine who have done the challenge, and they say the one cool thing is you get to meet yourself. And through that challenge, yeah. So what I did was back in 2016 is I decided, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in 2017. I'm going to take a year and a half. I'm going to train for this. And dude, I got in the best shape I have ever been in as far as like aesthetically and then performance. I mean, I was 40 plus years old and I could, crush 82 push-ups and I believe a minute and a half or whatever it was, whatever the timing was. I could do 30 plus nonstop pull-ups. I could run a mile in 7 minutes and 30 seconds, which I know is slow for some people, but for me, that was super fast. Like when I started training, my miles were like above 10 minutes, super slow runner. So for me, that was a huge improvement. And then I think like sit-ups and air squats, like it was basically the benchmark test. I took that test when I first started training my numbers and my numbers tripled within a year. So I was training. The problem was though, in 2017, I was gearing up. It was the end of February. I had been training now for 14 months, almost 15 months. And I started training very recklessly and training because my event was in June of 2017. So I was 3 months away and I was like, I'm not only going to do this, but I'm just going to like crush it. I'm going to go in. And so I was doing stuff really reckless. Like I was working out with like a weighted vest and, doing these WODs with like 20 different exercises. And I was doing, repetition after repetition. And I think one of my workouts on the day this whole thing started, I had done well over 1,300 repetitions between squats and and burpees and thrusters and pull-ups and all kinds of things. And I'll never forget, it was the end of February, and we had friends over that night. And I went into the bathroom and I washed my hands and I looked at myself in the mirror and I had like these railroad tracks in my eyes. Like I was just, and I remember I was like all day long, I just didn't feel right. Something was really wrong. And I was like, what is going on with me? And I had like these bags under my eyes, looked like I had been hit. And I just felt sick to my stomach. I just didn't feel right. Thought it would pass. Went to sleep that night. Couldn't sleep at all. The next day I woke up and did the smartest thing I possibly could, which was train for another 2 or 3 hours with no sleep, which was, and I was wearing that as like a badge of honor. I'm like, yeah, check this out. You know, I didn't sleep and I'm working out again. Well, that night I didn't sleep at all. 2 nights in a row. And what did I do on Monday? I went and worked out again. Stupid. And then 3 days turned into 6 days. And then 6 days turned into 9. And then 9 turned into 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, I ended up in the emergency room. And basically, I didn't understand what was happening. But within that 2 weeks, I was only averaging 90 minutes a night of sleep. I'd go to bed at like 11:30. I'd wake up at 1 and I was up for the whole night. Couldn't go back to sleep to save my life. Tried over-the-counter stuff like Benadryl and Unisom and like all this. Nothing was working. Went to the ER. They gave me, I can't remember, like Ambien or something like that. And that didn't work. It just made me feel terrible. It made me feel super hungover and just worn down and felt absolutely awful. So then I went another week, same thing, but only this time I was drugged, you know, so I was 90 minutes of sleep, drugged, felt absolutely wrecked, ended up in the ER again. Then, I mean, they tried me on a plethora of other things, you know, Xanax, a couple other sleep aids and lower anxiety. And just to kind of give you a pulse of like my mental and physical state, I lost about 20 pounds and I weigh about 185 pounds. And so I don't have 20 pounds to lose. I'm 6'1". So I dropped all the way down to like 165. And the crazy thing was, is I was still kind of trying to work out. I think like within about 3 weeks, I just gave it up after that. And then, what happened is after a month, I hit an all-time low. I was just not functional anymore. After a month of 1.5 hours of sleep, 2 hours a night at most, I wasn't producing with my work. I was in a severe depression. I had severe anxiety. I was being medicated. You know, at this point, my doctor was telling me like, look, man, you're going to die. Like you're either going to have a heart attack or a stroke. Like if we can't figure this sleep thing out. So I thought like, I pretty much thought I was doomed. And I basically, the only thing I could control was how am I going to end this? You know, am I going to be a victim and have a heart attack and then just be a vegetable, you know, to where like I watch my family and try to make ends meet with me, you know, not being able to support anybody because I just had a heart attack or a stroke. And I started thinking, I'll never forget this. It's super vulnerable, but I called my insurance guy and I was like, hey, man, are there any clauses or issues with my insurance policy of how I go out? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I just need to know. You know, he's like, what are you trying to say? And I was like, if something happens to me, is my family taken care of no matter what happens? And he's like, well, yeah, but what's going on? And I was like, it's really all I needed to know. And I told my wife, I was like, look, she was going to take my kids to Great Wolf Lodge for a weekend. We had this trip planned for a year. And I'll never forget her. She was getting ready to pack up on a Thursday night and leave that Friday morning. And I knew deep down, I was like, if she leaves, I'm here 3 days by myself with nothing but my thoughts and not sleeping, she's not going to come back to me. And I know that. So I told my wife that. I was like, look, I don't want to totally freak you out, but can you not leave? And she's like, well, you know, we've had this trip planned forever. I know you're not going to be able to go, but why do you need me to stay? And I was like, if I'm just getting really real with you, like I don't know if I'll be here when you get back. And that's when I think she really knew that this was serious. I went to the hospital And my plan was to stay at the hospital, right, for 4 days. I would go to the ER and be like, yeah, I just admit me. Like, I need somebody to take care of me. What I didn't understand is if all your critical, markers, your blood pressure, your heart rate, and all that is okay, they don't put you in the regular hospital. They put you in the level 1 psych ward. I didn't know that. So they told me, they're like, look, we want you to admit yourself to the hospital. You're not going to the regular hospital. This is the hospital you're going to. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, that's not me. That's not who I am. Like, and the doctor assured me, he's like, look, man, the level 1 is pretty normal people just going through a rough time. Level 2 and level 3, that's a different story. He's like, but level 1, you'll be there for a few days. People are normal, but just going through a rough time. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And he looked at me, he goes, can you honestly sit here and tell me that within 3 days, 4 days, or another week that you really feel safe with yourself? And I was like, no, I can't make that promise. And he's like, why don't you let us help you then? What do you got to lose besides your own life? So I surrendered, and I took that help, and I stayed there for 4 days. And that was the lowest point of my entire life, without a doubt. Walking in that hospital, signing papers, and then my wife for the next 4 days could only visit me from the hours of 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I didn't realize it then, but what basically happened to me is I just devastated my adrenal system and just completely fried myself physically. And then what happened is the sleep deprivation, mentally and emotionally, just wrecked me. And it was a nervous breakdown caused by too much physical trauma that ended up eroding my mental and emotional health and ended me up there. And then just to top the story off, after all that went down, I did recover. I'm fully recovered. I'm actually back in the best shape that I've ever been in. But I train smart now. I don't train stupid. But that gave me, I dealt with 8 months of PTSD because of that. Going through that traumatic event and not sleeping and really considering taking my own life. And then being in that hospital, it really messed with me. 2017 was a very dark year for me. And it took me probably until about the end of 2017 to recover. So I'm not sure if that's the story you wanted to hear, but that is definitely the no quit.
Well, I will say this, the story we quote unquote want to hear is the one that our listeners want to share. And I just want to say, first off, thank you for your transparency and your candor with that. I think it's ironic that you're sharing this story with what we're dealing with right now, which is going through this pandemic, the coronavirus, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think hopefully our listeners will connect in different ways, not obviously identical, but the whole perspective of our show is we want to connect with listeners, and we want to inspire people. We want people to be motivated to keep going. So if there's anybody that this story resonates with, I would highly recommend that they reach out and speak to someone. So before we jump back to the Corona perspective, I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just quickly telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today.
Sure. Start out with the juicy stuff, right? And then get to the stuff. So I am the founder of the Good Dad Project, also the Dad Edge, which is the Dad Edge podcast. I've been a host of that show. The show is 5 years old today, actually.
Congrats.
Thank you. I always joke and say, man, when I first started the podcast, I had about 10 good ideas, and after that, I was on God's good humor, and it's been just wildly successful. And it's been, God has definitely taken care of us and our community and the podcast, and it's been a true blessing.
Well, as I said, I interrupted you, but congratulations. 5 years is very exciting. We just passed our third year, so we got a little bit of time. So if you wouldn't mind just pausing for the next 2 years, and we'll catch up.
There you go.
So an interesting question I ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only choose one word, what word would you choose?
Relentless.
I love it. I think that's a I think that's a great word. Because you spoke about working out and how you're doing it today, I'm curious if you have a morning routine that you swear by.
Yeah, I mean, before this whole COVID thing hit, I had the same morning routine every morning, which was I got up at 5 or 5:15 every morning. I was in the gym meeting my two workout partners by 5:40. I was home before 7 because that's when I would take my 14-year-old to school. I have four boys, 14, 12, 6, and 4. So I would take my 14-year-old to school, come back, take my 12-year-old to middle school, come back, and my kindergartner, and then every now and again I would try to take my 4-year-old to preschool. So that was my morning routine. I also journal. I'm a big journal. I keep it very simple. 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things I'm excited about, my affirmation of the day. I map out everything that I have to do, when I have to do it, and then I do usually 1 chapter in the Bible with a reflection of some sort. And my goal right now is to beat my Bible up as much as I possibly can, because a brand new Bible sitting on the, that looks all pretty and polished is probably not the one that's used. But yeah, 2020, I made a commitment that I'm going to enrich my relationship with God, because it really wasn't the best. So been practicing that now every day.
I love that. And I appreciate you sharing your morning routine. It's something that I think is very interesting. And one of the reasons we ask that of each guest is not in any way, shape, or form to share the quote-unquote perfect routine, but to inspire people to take a deep and different look at their own morning routine. And I wanted to just follow up to the question about now during this COVID and what we're doing with this coronavirus, which is going around obviously not just in our country, but throughout the world. And maybe an interesting question, but do you have any suggestions, or do you have maybe one piece of advice to people that are having a tough time with, going through this? And I run a men's mastermind group, and one of the guys last Thursday night was talking about how he feels that just, he's stuck, and it's kind of like the Groundhog Day, the movie with Bill Murray. So maybe an interesting or difficult question, but just kind of wanted to throw that out to you.
Yeah, I think human beings, we learn most powerfully through story. So I'll share a tactic that's been really I too also facilitate a mastermind group for fathers, and we're really big on the quality of your life depends on the quality of the questions you ask yourself and those around you. So right now, my wife, I love her to death. She's an amazing woman. This is getting to her, right? I mean, and rightfully so, because she went from stay-at-home mom to all the kids in some sort of school, not necessarily full-time, but most of the time, to all of a sudden now she is teacher, principal, and dean of discipline, right? She has now picked up the slack for homeschooling, which is a huge challenge with 4 kids. And my wife is like, gosh, I just want to fast forward through this. I'm so over this. Why can't the kids go back to school? Why can't we get back to normal life? And, and I get in those ruts too, right? And sometimes I'll just ask her, well, how might we do things that we've never done before to make connections with each other we never have? So a cool story and how this showed up in our life is, overall, if you look at the entire situation as COVID, our family has been never more stressed out, rightfully so. But at the same time, we've connected in ways we never have. We've painted as a family. We've colored. We have built wooden cars and planes and that kind of thing, where we've done theme nights like WWE, where we put on wrestling masks, and we even have a belt, and we put mattresses down and we blare music, and I body slam the kids and they jump off the couches. And I actually made a video and posted it to Instagram, a 60 seconds of it, where we composed all the wrestling moves we were going to do. Is hilarious. And just things like that and Easter. So Easter was, a week ago. And for as long as I've known my wife, which has been the past 24 years, we've been married for 16. We've done the same thing for 24 years, which is head over to her extended family's house, where she has 27 first cousins. There's 70 people at Easter. There's an Easter egg hunt. There's all this stuff. Her family's super tight. And we woke up on Easter morning just feeling very empty. Wow, this is the first year in 24 years that we're not going to be able to do this with all the kids and Easter egg hunts. And this is what we do. This is what we've always done. And we were like, why can't this be over? Why is Easter like this year? Why can't we see our family? Any question that starts with why can't I, that's the wrong question. That goes back to the point, is the quality of your life depends on the quality of the questions you ask yourself. So instead of that, I was like, look, we understand all the reasons why we can't do something, but how might we make this Easter incredible despite what's going on? Like, how can we come together and do things we never have? And there were a lot of things that really showed up for us. We painted that day. We dyed eggs that day. We played flag football as a family that day. Even my wife did it. We cooked out that night. We played board games, and then we did a movie. And at the end of the night, we like kind of tipped our hat to each other. My wife and I were like, "Good day, good day," and probably one of the most memorable Easters. Like if I look at all the past 24 years of Easters, they all sort of blend together. You know, it was kind of the Groundhog Day of Easter. No year jumped out more than any other. You know, this year was like, wow, we did things really different, and it was pretty cool. So that's what I would suggest.
That's a really, really neat story, and I appreciate you sharing that. Want to just rewind for a second. So, obviously, having 4 boys and yourself, did your wife partake in the WWE night?
She recorded it. That was her job.
All right, so she was there. So no one, obviously, no broken bones or anything. But that's, it's interesting that you shared that story about Easter, and I think a lot of our listeners have a very similar perspective, not perhaps the exact 70 people in a family, but the first quote-unquote Easter that was extremely different. And I think the reality is you touched on asking questions, and I love that. And I believe it's also similar to the questions you asked, but also things don't happen to you, they happen for you. And I think the reality is it's easy to just say it. It's much harder to do it. But I think the thing that I've found is amazing is people in this coronavirus are joining together, and we've been using the hashtag We Rise by lifting others up, and it's just been really interesting to see. So I actually have a question for you. Within all this nuttiness, I wanted to ask, are there anybody that you're following, or is there anybody that you're following on social media that's got a really positive message that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
That's a really, really good question. There's actually, I wouldn't say that there's one person that I'm following more so than others. I definitely have the people that I'm, massive fans of. So no, I would say there's no one in particular. I'm not following anybody different than I already was.
Okay. No, and I appreciate your honesty of that. And as an author yourself, I'm curious if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're reading something during these challenging times that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, so this afternoon I'm actually interviewing Mark Devine, who's the founder of Seal Fit and Unbeatable Mind. I'm actually interviewing him on his latest book called I believe it's Starving Fear, and it's fantastic. So I'm reading his book right now, and I'm reading the one thing that I'm doing, just again going back to questions, doing things that I've never done, is I've always wanted to learn how to play guitar, and so I've started that. I started Fender. I don't have any financial interest in Fender Stratocaster, but one of our guys in our mastermind shared, like, hey, Fender's giving away 3 months of lessons right now. So I was like, oh, I'll sign up for that. And I've been doing that, and I've loved it.
It's interesting you said that. A buddy of mine is doing the same thing with piano. He's been saying for years, he's probably a couple years younger than you, but interestingly enough, he said to himself, you know what? I've been talking about it. I've spoken to my wife about it. I've told some friends about it. He said, I got to take advantage of it. And I'm not sure what he's doing, but I believe he said he found a free course on YouTube that he's using. So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really cool how companies and so you said Fender, it's 3 months of free lessons?
Yeah, as of right now, I'm not sure when this show is releasing, but I was able to just sign up. I think they're giving away 3 months of free lessons for the first 100,000 people.
That's awesome. And the reason I asked that question is I just want to follow up, is I've seen some amazing things by not only companies and individuals that are really putting their clients and people first and foremost. And obviously we've seen all the stuff on TV, companies, insurance companies and things are paying back premiums and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty amazing. But the flip side is companies like Fender and others that are really saying, you know what, not only are we going to do it, but we're going to give you 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 months of free lessons or free this. I think that's really awesome. So I'm glad you touch on that. One of the words we often talk about is accountability, and I'm just curious what accountability means to you, or perhaps how do you personally define accountability?
So I think accountability, depending on who you ask, it could be like a word that creates tremendous amount of ease and happiness, and then there's others that just creates an enormous amount of stress. Anything, what I'll share with you on accountability, anything that I've ever done in my life that was hard, I usually had to pay somebody and someone to keep me accountable. So like I completed the 75 hard at the end of last year. And I paid an accountability partner who's a fitness guru, to hold me true to what I was doing and to check in with me every day and check my fitness pal. And without accountability, I would not have done that on my own. There's just no way. Anything, like I said, anything that's worth doing that's hard, to me, accountability is usually the secret sauce. It's whether or not you're going to do it.
I love that. I think that's a perfect definition. Wanted to rewind to something you've touched about, mastermind, and I know it's something that we've all read about in different books, and I think Napoleon Hill wrote it in Think and Grow Rich many years ago. I know a lot of people, men and women, and co-ed groups and things, but I wanted, if you wouldn't mind, just dumbing it down and the simplistic version of what a mastermind is for any of our listeners maybe that are looking to get a group of friends or colleagues together to kind of help themselves during these challenging times.
Yeah, the way I always describe a mastermind is, for someone who's completely unfamiliar with what a mastermind even is usually, people that I speak with, they're spiritual people, and whether or not you're a spiritual person, you know what a Bible study is, right? And I always say, I was like, well, do you know what a Bible study is? And they're like, yeah. I was like, well, Bible study is a spiritual mastermind. It's a collected group of people who have a shared purpose, who have a foundation and like-minded goals, like-minded people. Their goal is to understand the Word of God and incorporate that in their life. And as they navigate life, and they hit roadblocks and obstacles and adversity and that kind of thing, they have their community of their Bible study folks that they can go back and share what's going on, to where they can get real-time strategy, someone to look at their particular situation with objective eyes and give them direction. Our mastermind, our 5 pillars are mastering your family finances, optimizing your health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, creating a legendary marriage, optimal connection with your kids, no matter what age they are, and being a leader in your business and community. And if you look at those 5 pillars, that's every guy who's a part of our mastermind. That's what they're focused on. And they're surrounded with other men who are like that. The other thing I always say too is that in order to do life with us in our mastermind, you have to be 3 things: humble, hungry, and emotional intelligence. And I'll just quickly go through each one. You got to be humble, because there are a lot of guys who aren't. A lot of guys are egomaniacs, and when a man shares like, hey, I want to connect better with my wife, we're not communicating as much as I want to, we're not as intimate as I would like, I'm really trying to be a study and a student of my wife and cultivate this amazing relationship. And if you have a guy who isn't humble and his advice is, well, you need to man up and grow a set of balls or something, that's terrible advice. And that's an ego talking. And that usually also that means that man has really no real-time advice. So being humble is key. Hungry, because a lot of men, unfortunately, or just human beings in general, they're comfortable being comfortable. They're comfortable being complacent. They're on what I would call the drift, as Gary John Bishop would say, or even Napoleon Hill, I think, used that term. The drift, the wash, rinse, repeat, where every day seemed like the last, and they really don't understand their purpose. They don't understand how to live what we call live legendary, and they're living isolated. And one of my greatest mentors said that isolation is the enemy of excellence. If you really want to do life and not do it in an optimal way, try to live it alone. So hunger is a big one. Emotional intelligence. Here's the thing with emotional intelligence. When you surround men or human beings in general, and they all have a shared purpose and a vision of how they want to go out and operate, and they're very eager to go out and learn how to do it, and they're hitting stumbling blocks. If you and I were in a mastermind together and you were to share like, hey, this is what's showing up for me in my life right now. There's some challenging things going on. Here they are, A, B, C, and D. And if I didn't have the emotional intelligence to empathize with you, so to understand, feel what you're feeling, be in the trenches with you, shoulder to shoulder, really understand, and then also be able to share with you some objective strategy, just some experiences that I've had in the past to give you more real-time strategy to go out and execute. And my advice to you is like going back to the humble thing. Hey man, you just need to man up. You were sharing a story with me that was really authentic before we even started recording about a divorce that you went through. And if I didn't have any emotional intelligence, I'd be like, they're just whatever, man, probably wasn't meant to be. Let's move on. Right? I mean, that's not an emotionally intelligent person. So that's why being in a mastermind, it's essential that you have those 3 skills.
Wow, I knew you would share some knowledge, but you dropped some very powerful stuff, and I'm going to copy some of that with the 2 groups that I lead. So want to change lanes here for a second into what we call our hot seat questions, and the only request we have is you just spit back the first thing that comes to mind.
You got it, man. Let's do it.
Awesome. So if you had one last meal and you could choose absolutely anything, what would you pick?
Sushi.
Favorite sport? Favorite sport?
MMA.
Favorite smell?
Oh, it would have to be the smell of my wife's neck when she puts her perfume on.
Favorite team?
Like professional team?
Either college, professional, whatever.
Wow. I would have to say, oh man, that's a really good question. I would have to say though, I'm from St. Louis. I'm a Cardinal fan.
Okay. Do you have an all-time favorite book?
I would say my all-time favorite book is probably Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Great book.
Former FBI hostage negotiator. Yeah.
Great book. Favorite movie?
300.
Favorite singer, band, or group?
OAR.
And do you have a favorite quote?
It would either have to be, again, to steal one of my greatest mentors' lines, Aaron Walker, who said, "Isolation is the enemy of excellence." That's one. If I could give you 3.
Yes, sir.
Quality of your life depends on the quality of questions you ask yourself and those around you. And probably the tip top of my list is the definition of hell is meeting the man that you could have been when you're lying on your deathbed.
Powerful, powerful. And then last question for you. If you were stuck in a foxhole and you could pick one person and only one person to have your back, who would it be?
My wife.
So I think our listeners definitely would be interested in following you and finding out a little bit more. So what's the best way for them to do so? Website, social media, but also for your podcast, if you wouldn't mind just mention that again as well.
Sure. And not to confuse your listeners, when we started Good Dad Project back in 2013, I thought and we started Good Dad Project podcast. That's still the umbrella, right? Everything is found at gooddadproject.com. But the brand, I would say, and the mission is really now called the Dad Edge. And so Good Dad Project is where you can find everything. We have a Facebook group called the Dad Edge, Real Dads with Purpose. We have a mastermind community called the Dad Edge Alliance Mastermind Community. You can find our podcast anywhere, the Dad Edge podcast. It's everywhere as far as Apple and Spotify and iHeartRadio and Stitcher and Podbean and all the other ones.
Awesome. And then last question we have for you is if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yeah. You can truly live your most authentic, legendary life. You just have to choose to step into it.
That's perfect advice to finish today's episode. So I truly, truly appreciate your time, what you shared with us, and I would definitely recommend that our listeners follow you and find out more about you as well as listen to your podcast. And I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
Oh, back at you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to episode number 259. I'm completely honored that Larry shared such a personal story with us. In life, I truly believe that it is during our darkest moments where we can become the best versions of ourselves. To end today's episode, I challenge each and every one of you to ask yourself those tough questions. You might not initially like all the answers, But greatness comes when you step out of your comfort zone. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.